Okay, so this is going to be a minimal introduction to sockets in Java, and there is a lot more to sockets than what I'm gonna have here as code, but for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm gonna have minimal amount of code here for because that I'll be able to explain to do an introduction to socket much better with a minimal amount of code, and I will be expanding on this tutorial in future clips. Okay, so let me first quickly show the code for the client and the server. So this is the client code, and this is gonna be the server code. So it's a minimal amount of code. Okay, and so what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna start the server from the command prompt, and then start the client from the command prompt also. And when I start the client, it's gonna automatically send a message to the server, and the message that is gonna be sent to the server is gonna be coming from the command prompt. It's gonna be the arguments that the user provides when they start the client from the command prompt. So they do Java and client, and then they do some message to be sent to the server. And then the server is going to receive the message, print that message out, and then echo that message back to the client to indicate that it received it. Okay. So after I do this, I will come back and go through this code and explain it in detail for both the client and the server. Okay, so I am here at the bin directory of the socket tutorial project, and so this is where the class files are going to be for the server and the client. So I have two command prompts. I'm going to go ahead and start the server on one of the command prompts and the client on the other command prompt. So the message that I'm going to be putting here is so this is the message I'm gonna have here, and so this is the server that I just started. That's running. I'm gonna go ahead and start the client. So it's gonna go ahead when I start the client. It's gonna send this message, Zain Academy, to the server, which is gonna print it out and then echo it back to the client, which is also gonna print it out. Okay, so I sent the message and the server received it. It says the following message was received from the client, and it printed out the message. It echoed it back to the client. It says the following reply was received from the server. It says server echoing back the following message, Zain Academy from client, and it terminated. So it's the simplest possible client server application. Okay. Okay, so let me go ahead and look at the server side. So what I have here is I have a server socket here, and what it does, what the server socket does is it essentially is gonna be waiting for requests to come in from a client over the network, and when the request comes in, it's gonna perform something based on that request and return a result to the client that requested something. Okay, so I'm instantiating here a server socket, and this is essentially a port. So you can have, depending on what port you want to specify, I specified this number for the port here. Okay, and so the client is gonna be sending to this port, to localhost, and this port it's gonna be communicating with this port on the localhost machine which the server is running on. Okay, so we have a server socket. We instantiated a server socket, and I'm gonna use that server socket to call accept on that server socket. And what accept is gonna do is gonna essentially listen for a connection that gets made to this socket, and it's gonna accept that connection, okay, from the client, and I end up with a client. So socket is a client socket. So I end up with a client socket. What socket is essentially is what it does is essentially it implements a client socket. And what is a socket? A socket is essentially an endpoint for communication between two machines. Or here, since we're on localhost, um, okay, so between the client and the server. Okay, very good. So next, what I'm gonna be doing here is I have a buffered reader here, and the way I'm gonna obtain a buffered reader is that I'm gonna use that client socket to get an input stream instance, and then use the input stream instance to get an input stream reader instance, and use that input stream reader instance in order to get a buffered reader instance. So this is the way I get a buffered reader. And what I'm gonna do with the buffered reader is I'm gonna use it in order to do a read line on it, and by doing that read line on that buffered reader, I'm gonna obtain the message that was sent from the client. And then what I do here, I go ahead and print that message. So I do the following: message was received from the client, and I print out the message that was received from the client. And then I go ahead, so the server here goes ahead and responds to the client, echoing back the incoming client message. So, and the way it's gonna do that is it's gonna use the client socket, so socket.get output stream, and then use that output stream to instantiate a new print writer, and then use that print writer instance to do a print line. And what that does is essentially it communicates with the client. It sends a message to the client when we do print writer.println. And what I'm gonna communicate back to the client is server echoing back the following message, and I'm gonna echo back the message that this server received from the client. So I'm gonna echo it back to the client, and in case there was an exception, I'm gonna catch the exception and exit. Okay, so this is the server. On the client side, so we have a client socket, so socket, and here I'm instantiating a socket on listening on localhost, and this port, same port as the server. Communicating on localhost and this port with the server. Okay, communicating on this port with the server. And then, so what the client first gonna do is gonna send a message to the server, and the way it's gonna send a message, it's gonna use the client socket and get an output stream from there, and then use that output stream instance that it gets back in order to instantiate a print writer instance, and use that print writer instance in order to call print line on it to send a message to the server. And the message is gonna be arg0. And what arg0 is essentially is from the command line, the first argument that is entered after so Java, and then the name of the client to be instantiated, and then you put the argument that you want to send to the server. So Java client, and I used here Zain Academy as argument. Okay, so and then the second thing that's gonna happen here is that the client sends a message to the server. The server is gonna communicate back to the client, and what we're gonna do here is we're gonna use socket.get input stream, and then use that input stream instance to get an input stream reader instance through it, and then use the input stream reader instance to get a buffered reader instance, and then use that buffered reader instance in order to do a read line on it, which is gonna give us the message echoed back from the server, the message coming back from the server, and I'm gonna be printing it out here, so that the client is gonna print out that message coming back from the server, and in case there is an exception, it's gonna print this exception in listen socket, and then it's gonna exit. Okay. And if in case there was not one argument, more than one argument, or less than one argument entered on the command line when we instantiated the client, I'm gonna print out a message saying system error.println. So I'm gonna say usage client, and then actually there is no server, so it should say here usage client and name. Okay.